Hello. Happy Thursday. Hello. Hello, Bonnie. How are you? Hi, Robin. Happy Thursday, peeps. So good that you're here. I always think, okay, what are we going to talk about today? I hope you guys had a good week. I, for one, cannot believe it's already Thursday night. And I am doing well. It seems like everybody I've talked to this week has really commented about how fast the time has gone. And I feel that way too. I feel like it was just Monday. And there's been a lot of people that have, and I know we've talked about this within the last few weeks. So today it snowed here, and it was one of those really perfect snows where the flakes were big and it laid on the trees and covered the grass, didn't cover the roads because they were too warm. It was so surprising. I got up. The sunrise was phenomenal this morning. The whole sky was lit up. I took pictures and I sent it to my kids, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's going to be a great day. It's so beautiful. And then I went and I had my coffee, went and got a shower, came out, and it was snowing. I'm like, I was shocked. But it was just like for 4 hours, it was just this really beautiful snow, and then it rained on top of it. So it's gone now, but it motivated me to get my Christmas decorations out and put up the tree. So I got that done. I had an early session. Hi, Stacy. And then I had a long break before my afternoon and evening sessions. So I put on some Christmas music, made myself a latte, got my Christmas tree up, and did a little decorating. I think I talked on Monday night about how I was just going to do a little decorating in this room. And so I did that, and then had good night sessions, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, tomorrow's Friday again. Tomorrow I'm doing another, and probably tomorrow and Saturday I'm doing another continuing ed class about narcissism. You're jealous of the snow. Stacy, it was beautiful. It really was. It was beautiful. I'll show you a picture of my backyard because it really was so lovely. And so this is just kind of, I think this is through the screen too. So it's not a great picture, but the snow was so pretty. I guess you don't have to see all those other things. Yeah, look. Hello, Bridget. Look at this sunrise. I can't. That just never shows up. You can't really, looking in the mirror. It was pink and orange. It was. Yeah, it just lovely. Absolutely love it. Lovely. And so I just want to say, for any of the people, hi Bella, hi Lisa. For any of the people who are popping in and don't know who I am, my name is Leslyn. I'm a therapist by day, and I come into my lives as a way of giving back. So if you have a question, you don't know how to handle something, you have questions about my content, please feel free to ask. The people in this space are very kind, loving, compassionate people, and if you need a little of that tonight, feel free to hang around. By the way, the new codependency, we're going to have a book discussion the first Thursday of January. I think it's the 5th, if I'm not mistaken. First, second, third, might be the 4th. first Thursday of January, we're going to be talking about the new codependency. And I'm going to try to get that worksheet finished this weekend. I have a really good start on it, but I want to get it. Thank you, Lisa. January 4th. I want to get it to you. I am going to just do it. I'm going to go ahead and make it, create it, and then try to license it. And we'll see what happens with that. They probably won't, but you're not going to know until you ask, right? So the new codependency, I've listened to this at least once, and I have had this book for years, but I went to grab it on Monday night at the office, which is where I keep most of my self-help books. This one little shelf back here. Anyway, it wasn't there. So someone either helped themselves to it, or I'm pretty famous for loaning my books out and not keeping track of who I loan them to. As a matter of fact, that's usually one of the things I do at the end of every year when I have extra money in my business account, is I just buy a whole slew of books as a business expense and then kind of restock my shelves, because I really do give away so many books. Anyway, so if you are reading this and you want the workbook as I finish it, please let me know by shooting me an email or sending me a message, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of it. And the workbook is really designed, my intent with the workbook is to be able to have you think about how what she has written in here impacts your life today. Like, what are the things that I'm learning in this book that impact my life today? I had a conversation recently about healing, and we've talked about this so many times. We've talked about, even though I'm not the one that caused the pain, it is my pain. If I get to adulthood with these wounds, it's my job to fix them. Nobody else can fix them for me at that point. And almost every time I have this conversation, we touch on the piece about being victims of the people who hurt us. And by definition, we are victims. We didn't have any power. We didn't have any control when we're children. We're victims of other people's ignorance, their immaturity, their poor parenting. But we don't have to stay victimized, right? And there may be a different way to say this, but what I really want to say to you is that today, as an adult, you have power over healing those parts of you that someone else is responsible for breaking, right? You have power. You're no longer a victim of that person. And it's a really, really touchy word. And I use it with caution because I don't want to dismiss in any way, shape, or form the people whose experiences were truly victimizing, people who were truly victims. And I think as children, one could say we're all victims of our parents, of what they don't know, of our parents' ignorance, right? But we don't have to stay victimized and we literally have a responsibility to ourselves, I believe, to heal those spaces. And it's a process, you know. I talk about this. I wish I could get, and I don't really, like, I want to be careful what I ask for here. I was going to say, I wish I could get all of my clients to come in and really listen to my lives. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like two more, they're not really counseling sessions, but they're two more opportunities to hear the same things, right? I don't really want all my clients in here because certainly this is not therapy. But at the same time, I talk about a lot of from a psychoeducation space, I talk about a lot of the things that I try to teach clients. And it's so interesting to me how TikTok filters comments. So if you have asked something, you might need to ask it again a different way, because I just got notified that TikTok filtered comments. Anyway, I don't need to harp on that really, but I think it's important to remember that once you hit adulthood, you have your power back. Even though it may not feel like it, and even though you may not know what to do with it, it's yours. And I think that's the value of therapy, right? Of counseling, is that, and self-help books, is that you can learn what to do now that you actually are in control and have the power to do something. So tell me about your weeks. Let me know if you have any questions. Hey, Jim. Tell me what you're doing this weekend, if it's something fun. I have a bunco Christmas party to go to. I don't know how many of you remember playing bunco, but that's one of the things that my meetup group brought back, was bunco. And it's too funny because it really, you know, I understand why it was a rage, right? It's and I played years ago. It was the thing that went around suburban neighborhoods. You know, it seemed like every subdivision had a bunco group. And then people grew up, or their kids got older, and their lives got busier. And as it fizzled out in these neighborhoods, very few people actually brought it back. So our meetup group brought bunco back. And I don't get to play all the time because they often play when I can't. But on Sunday, we're having a big holiday get together, so that should be fun. Somebody asked me the other day if I make time for myself socially, and that's definitely going to be one of the things I do. What else happened this week? I'm trying to think if there were any themes that popped up this week. You know, I just posted another enmeshment video about mothers and daughters, and enmeshment. And when I work with people who come from enmeshment, in families that are enmeshed, or relationships that are enmeshed, and I feel like I've talked about this. It seems, it's not a feeling. My sense is I've talked about this before, but healing from enmeshment takes time. And it takes a lot of patience, because patience with yourself, learning how to set boundaries. One of my micro courses for next year is going to be about setting boundaries, about the challenges of setting boundaries. And it's never, I can't think of a time when it's really a black and white, all or nothing kind of thing. Bridget, enmeshment is when relationships are so close that everybody's kind of all up in everybody else's business. There's a significant absence of boundaries. There's a lot of oversharing. There's a lot of interdependent, but in an unhealthy way, I'm not even going to say interdependent. I'll say a lot of dependent responsibility, with emotions and feelings and dreams and hopes and aspirations, in an enmeshed mother-daughter relationship. For example, the video I just posted kind of gives you some examples. And I see it more frequently in mothers and daughters than I do, and mothers and sons than I do, but mostly mothers and daughters than I do in like fathers and sons. How do you heal from enmeshed mom and daughter? She's just disappeared. First of all, I think it starts with setting boundaries, and it's so painful to do that. And maybe I don't really know who's disappeared, but one of the things, and you're welcome, Bridget, one of the things that happens in enmeshment is that because boundaries are so hard to set in an enmeshed, because I wanted better for her. Yeah. And, this is something I say all the time. Let me finish that thought. Because somebody's so enmeshed and the boundaries don't feel good, sometimes people think it's easier to take that all or nothing approach and just completely disengage. Sometimes that happens in the process of healing, and then there's the coming back after the individual healing has taken place. It's really hard, though, when boundaries feel, let's see, I want to be careful, because in part of what I try to do here is I try to demonstrate the kind of language that I espouse. So I often talk about how deeply embedded our vernacular is in a way that makes communication really uncomfortable or ineffective. And when we equate love, or when we understand love that doesn't have any boundaries, when that's our expression of love, all of a sudden boundaries feel really unloving, right? So when a daughter is saying, hey, listen, I need some distance, and sets that boundary, especially to a mother, it's going to feel like, oh my gosh, where did my mother go? Where did my daughter go? Oh my gosh, she doesn't love me. Oh my God, it's going to establish a panic. That would be very common, right? So, because I would say that that's the daughter's last-ditch effort at setting a boundary. It could be also a first-ditch effort just because there's no awareness or knowledge of what it takes to set a boundary, so they just disengage. Now, what I tend to find is that it's the child who tries to separate out of the enmeshment. Enmeshment feels good to the person with the most power, if that makes sense. Enmeshment is often a way that we garner our I don't believe that it is done. Enmeshment is generally, I don't know many people who engage in enmeshment maliciously. As a matter of fact, I would tell you that the people I work with don't even understand it as enmeshment. They often come from enmeshment. And let's get really stereotypical. So if you see yourself here, it's coincidental. I'm just going to get really, I think I understood, Stacey. I'm going to get really, I'm going to, let's see. Bear with me. I just had 4 sessions kind of back to back, and so my brain's a little fried. I'm going to use a hypothetical situation. Let's take the proverbial Italian mom, right, who has daughters. And maybe we'll say old Italian, right? And I'm not trying to be, please don't read into this. I'm just really trying to give you a good example. So that mom may have grown up in, and if you think about it, so many of your moms and grandmoms grew up, especially if you grew up in cities, probably grew up just down the street from their mom and grandmom. And so all the aunts and uncles lived right close together. And in the idea of that was interdependence. And in a video I posted the other day, I made some distinctions between interdependence in a healthy way, and especially culturally, and enmeshment. There's a very distinct difference. When someone grows up in a tight-knit, interdependent community, which is the way a lot of people grew up in the early part of the 20th century, maybe 2/3 of the 20th century, if there's immaturity or trauma or whatnot, that can literally get distorted into enmeshment very, very quickly. Not because somebody's trying to be malicious, but because somebody is trying to get their emotional needs met through their family. And we'll say now it's the Italian mom trying to get maybe her husband's blue collar. He works down at the shipyard. He goes to the corner tap. He comes home drunk. Her emotional outlet is her daughters. And so she lives vicariously through them because she gave her life to a man who's now a drunk. And of course, this story can go lots of different ways. It's just a metaphor. So in her emotional fulfillment, she is telling her daughters as they grow up all of the things that she would have shared with her partner, but he wasn't there. Maybe she's got sisters and her own mother in a neighborhood. Maybe she's trying to relive her youth through her daughters by saying, tell me everything about the boys that you're dating or the life that you have. She's the mother who dresses up, dresses to the hilt as a 21-year-old and goes out with her daughters to the bars. She's the one who has independent relationships with her daughter's friends, maybe. And there's just this real absence of boundaries. I don't believe that it's ever meant to be nefarious. The problem comes in that the children who grow up in an enmeshed environment, come to believe that this is love, but it feels really claustrophobic. And maybe, and often one of the distorting factors is that it limits or prevents the children from having a sense of separateness. They feel they can't make decisions on their own for fear that it's going to negatively impact the parent who's been leaning on them for emotional security. So many times when I am working with people who came from enmeshed families and have propagated or perpetuated the enmeshment, there are unhealed wounds from their own childhood and a lot of fear and an unknowingness. Like, if I separate myself from my children, where does my fulfillment come from? And it's to someone who doesn't have that experience, it is really hard to understand how that happens. But it's not, it's one of those things that's quite normal to you if you grow up in that environment. Hi, Tin, how are you? And when you grow up like that, pulling away or separating can feel really painful. And I have to tell you, when I look back, I absolutely see myself in my mother, right? She didn't do anything without her mother's stamp of approval. And if her mother said, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it's my grandmother who told my mom to join the army because that was going to be a good way to get the skill set that she needed. And she said, I'll take care of your kids while you're in the army, because back then mom had to give away her parental rights. And the minute she did that, my dad, who felt abandoned because she also was in the process of divorcing him, took us from Pennsylvania to California, kind of stole us. So it gets so convoluted sometimes, right? Or when you lose the parent, when the parent dies suddenly, or leaves suddenly. I think my mother and my grandmother were terribly enmeshed. And that was how my mother knew to love, was to just, and she understood love. So if you weren't literally flooding her with love, she didn't believe that you loved her. And I think that was the problem in my parents' marriage. And then when I finally was able to live close enough to my mom again, there was this flooding. And of course, no boundaries. Like when I think about it, absolutely, Lisa, we pass it down. And I can tell you that if I hadn't become a therapist, I don't know. I think I was acutely aware of it enough that I could have stopped it without knowing, right? But by becoming a therapist, or when I became a therapist, and if you are in here and you don't know me, I was in my 40s when that happened. And I think that I could very easily have, and probably in some ways did, project some of that onto my kids, especially after the trauma of losing Rocky, my first husband, because my attachment style just shifted to very anxious attachment. And for my kids, I mean, I know I said to my son on more than one occasion that he owed it to me not to die, that was my trauma speaking, right? It's, I'm telling your story. I think, I hope you guys understand, because Stacy's saying that, Lisa, you're saying that, Lisa. I know now that it was unhealthy, but get very defensive and protective. Yeah. It's so interesting when you can step back and see. And I want to say when you can see your parents, but it's really about seeing you in the context of the family that you grew up in, to notice how it shaped you, right? And I want to also encourage you to try, when I hear people getting defensive, what that means is they believe, or they're assuming, that that someone's judging. But at the end of the day, you just did what you knew. And your parents probably did what they knew. And if you can get to a place where you accept that this was where they were, it makes all the difference. It's very easy to be angry. I know that when my mother left, it shaped a huge part of my life. It kind of destroyed a big part of my sister's life, who was just younger than me. And when I say destroyed, it distorted. Hello, Mama Kay. Saw dysfunction, but you couldn't name it. Interesting. It's when something gets that distorted, it's really hard not to blame the person, right? But at the end of the day, I really haven't met very many people that are maliciously misshaping or what's the word? Not misshaping, distorting. I don't believe people wake up and say, let me just put a couple holes in that mold. That's not what they do. So I try to get people to look back or look at the family that they grew up in without emotion. And I know how hard that is. It took me years to see my mother as she was versus who I wanted her to be, which, by the way, is kind of a pattern for me. I have a long history of seeing people based on who I wanted them to be instead of who they actually presented themselves to be. I don't do that anymore, but at least I don't think I do. I shouldn't say anything absolutely, because God knows. Anyway, I kind of lost track of where I was going with that. But if you have any questions, I mean, I'm absolutely, this is, I think part of what I was going to say is that there are no perfect parents. And for all of you who are trying to be a perfect parent, try to let go of that, because there just are no perfect parents. And even if you really kind of check all the boxes, we have no control over the interpretation that our children are going to take from that. And, you know, just like so many of us, when you are a parent, you can contextualize that, well, I met this. Well, that hurt me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I never in my wildest dreams did I do that to hurt you. Now, I hear you. I hear that it hurt you. And I'm so very sorry that anything I did would have hurt you. What do you need from me? Because that happened, whatever it is, as long as it's not something that's continuing to happen, right? I think the whole reason that my girls don't have a relationship with their dad is because he says, I'm sorry, but then he doesn't change. Now, something that happened, sometimes I tell this story. There was a point in my life when my belief system was, I guess, on natural consequences, but it was more about like proving a point. And my son said that, so I hope there are no little children listening, but my son said that he decided he didn't believe in the Easter Bunny. And I want to say he was probably 11. And I said, well, you know, the Easter Bunny doesn't come if you don't believe. I mean, why? Easter Bunny just isn't going to come if you don't believe. And pretty sure by then we had at least the 2 girls. And hey, what's up? Thanks for the follow. And so the Easter Bunny brought the 2 girls Easter baskets, and they were pretty much, and the girls were little, so they were pretty much in plain view. And doggone it if Frank didn't come waking us up crying because he couldn't find a basket and the Easter Bunny didn't leave him a basket. And I said, maybe the Easter Bunny just didn't want to hide your basket. Why don't you check by the front door? And the Easter Bunny had left his basket down on the outside of the front door. 15 years later, there was an entire discussion about the impact that event generated. The intention was I guess, to teach a lesson that you have to believe in order to receive. I think that was probably the lesson. But it didn't land that way. And the perception was, because, eventually we talked about the reality of it. And I think the perception was that I was just downright mean. And there's probably some truth in that, although I did not see that at the time, right? That my intention wasn't to be mean, but that's the way it landed. And my job as a parent is not to say get over that, not to say that that's a dumb way to look at it, not to judge. My job as a parent is simply to hear that, acknowledge that that perception was real in that moment, and then to apologize, right? I mean, intention works, but if you understand that intention does not, if I don't intend to get in a car accident, it doesn't change the fact that there was an accident. There was damage, right? My intention really doesn't speak to the damage at all. And that's the part that so many parents miss. My intention does not speak to the damage. It only speaks to my intention. We have to address the damage also. And there's so many things. Yes, of course, Lisa. And although some people do try to dismiss damage, and generally, it's their narcissistic behavior, personality disorders. A lot of people will say, I hear you, I'm sorry, and then they go right back and do it again. Big problem with addiction, which is a problem, and the repeated behavior is the symptom of the problem, right? The underlying problem. So I wish it was more black and white. It isn't. But the key is always remembering that if we're not acknowledging the damage, then the attention doesn't matter. And it falls on deaf ears, because the people who are bringing it up, they don't really care what the intention was. What they care about is that we recognize the damage. So let's see. What else? Your dad's an alcoholic, yeah. My children also. And even that has varying degrees, right? And the damage is so, and to Stacy's point, how people are impacted so differently, that's what makes it so challenging. Because, it's like pain tolerance, right? The disparity of memory. That is really hard. All right, let me finish talking about that, and I'll come back to the memory. What was I saying about that? People are impacted so differently. Pain tolerance. We all kind of understand physical pain tolerance, but we also have emotional pain tolerance differences, And that's less understood because we don't talk about it as much. But we hear it and see it the way people react to stuff. Just because they don't react the way I would react doesn't mean that it's not painful. It just means that we have different pain tolerances. And the disparity of memory is so hard because if somebody's denying that something happened, it feels so dismissive, right? That never happened. Yeah, well, that's what I remember. And most of the time, and you guys have probably heard this by now, when we remember, we're actually remembering just the last time we remembered it. So if we don't have a precise account written within a couple of hours of the event, then it's not going to be a literal description of the event. The only way to get the literal description is, well, technically the only way to get a literal description is to record it. Because every single part of what happened is going to be interpreted through the lens of who each individual person is. And we're all triggered by different things. We're all keyed in or clued in by different words and emotions and body language and eye contact. And so what we take in is all so individual. And that's what our memory is based on. It's based on what we take in. I know I talk about this a lot. My sister Allison, my stepmom, my aunt, and myself all went to an event. Allison and I were teenagers. I have no memory whatsoever of being there, none whatsoever. And yet the three of them swear I was there, but I have no memory of it. And the three of them argued incessantly about what actually happened at the event, which is fascinating. It really is fascinating, but really hard when you're counting on somebody else to remember, and really, really hard when someone is literally in denial of it. I try, especially with memory, and I teach hands down, don't contradict someone's memory. Hello, Becca. Don't contradict someone's memory. You weren't there, or you're not in their head. You can't tell them that it didn't happen that way. All you can do is say that's not how you experienced it. I have no recollection of that. And if I do have a recollection, my version of that, my experience of that, was completely different than your experience. Really important words there. Don't dismiss someone's memory of something. We don't have a right to do that. So with that being said, any other questions? By the way, oh, they sure do. I'm not, even though I'm the one. I know. It's it's like rule number one when I'm talking about trying to work with what has happened. By the way, for my subs, The last Sunday of the month is actually New Year's Eve. The Sunday before that is Christmas Eve. So the end of December probably is not going to work for any of us. So I'm thinking about going to Sunday, that first Sunday night in January. And I just wanted to pull that out there because, and in terms of that, Christmas and New Year's are on Mondays. And that means our Monday lives, probably my Monday live. I won't be going live on Monday for Christmas and New Year's. Well, maybe New Year's. I don't really do anything on New Year's Day. And by the time New Year's Day night rolls around, depending on what happens for New Year's, which I'm often in bed by 10 o'clock anyway. It's so interesting to me. Last night, what was it? My daughter called yesterday, my youngest daughter, and said, I'm getting my hair cut, but I want to come up and get a bunch of stuff that's at your house. Now, she lives an hour away. And I said, okay, well, if you don't finish with your haircut until 8, it's going to be 9 by the time you get here. Are you going to stay? She goes, no, I'm just going to turn around and go home. I'm like, oh, honey, it's going to be so late. And she said, Mom, I'll be home by like 10:30. And I'm like, oh, honey, that's so late. And then I stopped and I'm like, oh, gosh, Leslyn. So here you are trying to control something that's not yours to control. I said, I'm like, yep, you know what? You're young. I'm not going to worry about it, Emily, but that's what it is, right? I just instantly go, oh, you can't drive that late. Oh my gosh, there's so much we learn as parents if we just are willing to sit back and see ourselves, right? Thank God my kids are gentle with me because she's like, Mom. I'm like, okay. And when I hear that, I know what I have to do is sit back and reflect. When I hear, Mom, I'm like, okay, listen up, Leslyn, what are you doing? Oh, you're trying to control. And it's always the same thing. Why are you trying to control? I'm trying to control because there's risk involved in that. You don't like risk. Safety, right? Their safety. And yet, to be honest, that's when the least number of people are on the highway. I-95 is a wreck between Philadelphia and Baltimore right now. So that's probably the best time of day to travel. So anyway, she came up, got a hug, got her stuff, went home. It was all good. But it is kind of funny because that's my go-to. And no matter how much work I've done, I still can't catch myself all the time before it pops out of my mouth. I just vomit my worry on my kids. Anyway, so there you go. It doesn't matter how much work you do. You still have to keep working. Hello, love changes. How are you? I was thinking the other day that I have been doing this live. It does kind of happen naturally, but I don't like it nonetheless. I know. I mean, we can. I am hands down. Oh my gosh. In the last 15 years, probably, and again, becoming a therapist really changed a lot of this because I was forced to really, I wasn't forced, but I really took the time to self-reflect and learn about about me. But it still is a, it's still, oh, I was going to say 15 years ago, Frank, poor Frank, he just got the brunt of what I didn't know. It's well, in hopes, Lisa, that it will help you grow. You know, yeah. Frank called this morning. He and I share a real curiosity about AI and the future of AI and kind of investing in AI. Aw, Lisa, you know what? As long as you're just keeping that in the forefront of your mind, you will. But don't put pressure on yourself to do that. You know, it's, if you can be 1% better in some area on a daily basis, you know, it's like, and keep in mind that what's normal is that we turn our attention over here and we do 10% better over here, and then, because it's a lot like spinning plates, right? And then I drop this ball over here and then I come over here. And I think at the end of the day, it's about cumulatively acquiring information and tools that get you to a place where every day you're saying, what do I need to learn from this? Or how do I grow from this? Or what tools are in my toolbox for this? Or who do I want to be today? How can I be a better version of that today? Sometimes my new phase, quest, my new goal is to really pay attention to being kind and accepting of myself, right? For example, I think I said to you that on Monday, that all weekend, there was this propensity and pulling for me to say I should decorate. And I just kept saying, it's okay, Les. It's okay if you don't want to. Just wait until you feel ready. And if it's Christmas Eve, it's Christmas Eve. I think I do a lot more of that. Like my focus is really a lot more of that. Little things like giving myself permission to fail. Melissa isn't here. Remember when I talked about my typo? Melissa found a typo on one of my products, and I said, oh, thank you, it wasn't really a typo, that's just the way I spell, blah blah blah. Well, Tuesday morning I get a picture from her with the typo circled. It was in a completely different space. There were actually two problems on that graphic. And so, you know, I think as I've been talking about so much, really learning to give myself permission and finding grace for myself when I make these mistakes or I miss the mark or I don't get something finished. Like that's really my mission at the moment, is actively allowing and accepting me. And I talk about it all the freaking time. And I think it's happened in layers, right? Because I've accepted, oh my gosh, my acceptance journey has happened for so long. And yet there's still these things down here that are so deeply embedded that digging them out, it's like you have to, it's almost like an archaeology project, right? It's like I was able to get the backhoe out and begin with, but the closer you get to some of that really delicate stuff, some of that old stuff, you have to move very carefully because it's really, really down in there. And you're like, okay, I think we can get rid of this now. And then you pull it, a piece of it breaks off. You're like, damn it. So I'm going to take out this piece, but there's still this whole big piece left in there. I chunked away at it a little bit. Acceptance is hard. You know, it's when I do the retreat, it's a big part of what we talk. I mean, self-awareness is a huge part. I would say that that's the biggest part, because you can't change or accept what you don't see. And so many of us have coping mechanisms that prevent us from seeing those parts of ourselves that we don't want to accept, because people don't teach acceptance. And so we deny, we avoid, we bury, we reframe, we reimagine, we recreate, like literally fiction stories about what actually happened. I ran into a situation this week where someone had definitely an ACE event, right? And somebody's going to ask me what ACE means, and I can't remember. But when I say an ACE event, it's like one of those big events that happens. And I'll try to remember. It'll come to me at some point. So this person had an ACE event, and I sat back and my eyebrows went up, and then they went on to explain how it was perfectly fine. And of course, all I could think of was the story I told myself for years, 20 plus years, about my mom leaving and how it was okay. She really needed to find a way to support herself, and you know, she did this, and the whole time, like, I literally as a kid just, it's okay, it's okay. Yeah, she did this. I created a narrative that made it easy for me to live with. And so many of us do this, and that's what this person did. They created a narrative that was, yeah, it was fine, to something that was absolutely not okay. That's what we do. And so I wasn't going to in that moment, because it came up kind of as a side note, ironically, to a different discussion. And it wasn't the time for me to address it. It also, by the way, what's really interesting, I don't know how many of you remember this story, but when I told years and years and years ago, when I first told a therapist, well, I had the perfect childhood. My mom left when I was 12, and then my dad started drinking. It was okay because I got to play house. I was the oldest. And, I got to stay home from school. Like if my brother was sick or if somebody missed the bus, my dad was already at work. So sometimes we kind of stayed home, and I took care of everybody. And then my dad drove us across the country, dumped us on the doorstep of an aunt we had never met, and he took off to go find a job. And then, and then I went to 5 high schools in 3 years, and that was after attending 3 different schools in the 8th grade. And then, my parents left again, but I kind of stayed behind. And I met this guy, and 10 days later I was engaged. This is my life story, yes. And then 10 days later I was engaged, and because like he was hot and nobody like him had ever shown interest in me, so I just latched onto him like there was no tomorrow. And 3.5 years later he was dead, and I was a single mom to this baby, and we had no money. Like he had no life insurance, so we were pretty destitute after he died. Like, and my therapist is listening to all this, and I wasn't a therapist then, but I can imagine what it was like to hear that. And all I said to her was, yeah, but I'm good. Because I learned very, very young to create a positive narrative that showed me as the hero of the story, or I didn't really have to be a hero, although actually now that I'm thinking about that, now that that popped out, I do have a little bit of a pattern of rescuing people. Actually, I don't have a little pattern. I actually have a pretty big pattern of rescuing people. So it's really pretty interesting to sit back and look at all that. Anyway, there is nothing that therapist could have said to me that would have convinced me that my story was different, right? And when I had space and safety, I was able to see the story differently. But even that took 3 years in grad school, right? I don't know that I ever would have had the tenacity to spend 3 years in therapy unpacking all of that. Yeah, see? It really is so interesting. And that's why self-awareness, and I'm so happy, Stacey, to hear that you've made such great strides, because that's why self-awareness is so hard. We have to start seeing things that we don't want to see, or that we've made a pattern or a habit of not seeing, right? It's just, I just think it's fascinating. I really do. I heard thanks, Stacy. I appreciate you saying that. I heard something the other day, and it was a guy on TikTok, doctor somebody, and it looked like he was doing a podcast. So I should write down some of these people, but I don't. He said behavior is a form of communication. Oh, you're welcome, love. Behavior is a form of communication. It's a language, he said. Behavior is a language. And there was something about that. And of course, we learned that, behavior is a consequence, or not a consequence, but a kind of an extension of, or part of communication. But I never really thought about it as behavior is a language. But there's a lot to be said for that. If you think about that, just really think about it for a minute. When you see somebody engaged in really ugly behavior, just stop and think about, if behavior is a language, what are they trying to say? So for your kids, If behavior is a language, what are they trying to tell me? And if you don't speak that language, you cannot make assumptions about that language, right? This is why we all have this problem. Well, I would never do that. Well, you obviously don't speak that language. Just because you would never do it doesn't mean it's not impactful or necessary to the person who speaks that language. Just think about that for a minute. Take it in. If behavior is a language, what is that person trying to tell me? Right? And the one thing I would say about that, love, is it can give you one perspective, right? When I often will say to clients, you know, I can remember back to when X, Y, and Z happened, and I remember I felt A, B, and C. Is that at all similar to the experience that you're having? That's good. Like, being able to connect to somebody on a shared experience is really powerful, but always double check. Because remember, earlier I said that we have different tolerances, different pain tolerances, different interpretive capacities. And so if I interpret something this way, it might be similar to how someone else interprets it, but it might be totally different. And that's why communication is so hard, you know? So anyway, I'm going to sign off, but real quick, but I want to show everybody this picture because I think it's really cute. Inbox. By the way, I added a couple of things. Good night, love. Hello, Mac. I added a couple things to my TikTok shop today. There is a beautiful tree of life. I'm so happy with the way it turned out. And I put it in a poster because I figured I didn't have a poster yet. And you're welcome, Mama Kay. So I didn't have a poster yet, and I wanted to have one, and it comes in a whole bunch of different sizes. Hold on a minute, because I really do want to show you this. Nope, that's not it. Oh, here it is. This picture is super cute. The staging of this, thanks to Bonnie. Can't see it really good, but that's my book in front of her Christmas tree with presents. Look how beautifully those things are wrapped. Bonnie, like, you are a master wrapper. That's so pretty. She said she staged this and then said it would make a really good gift. So listen, if you want to spend 2024 getting to know yourself a little bit better, my book is on, they're from Hobby Lobby, the gifts. I know, it's so pretty, isn't it? There's a link in my bio for the book. It's on Amazon. And I always feel a little funny saying this, but if you want a autographed one, I have copies here. I'm happy to send you an autographed one. I charge the same price that Amazon done. I make a little bit more if you buy it from me, so I just cover the shipping in that. So it's still $20. Oh, actually, I think it's $15 on Amazon, but I've been charging it to cover shipping, I guess. Anyway, my point is, if you want it from me, just shoot me an email, or you can order it right from Amazon or any bookstore retailer, Barnes and Noble, your independent bookstore can get it, because I do have it in worldwide distribution. So it does make a good Christmas present. And if you want to follow us, we're having our book discussion this first Thursday of the month. We're going to be talking about The New Codependency. This is a book that I recommend to a ton of clients, especially people who need to understand what boundaries are, how to set them, how to uphold them. So put that on your calendar for January 4th. And I'll see you guys Monday night. Thanks for hanging out with me. I really do appreciate all of you. And I hope you have a great weekend.